Welcome to another episode of the Growth League podcast. I'm here with my guest, Jared LaMantia. He is the Senior Executive CMO and a fitness enthusiast, but the CMO of FitLab. For those of you just listening audibly, you won't be able to see the fact that I think Jared might be able to bench press me like 50 times. And so definitely on brand for the company that you're leading the marketing effort for. Jared, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's start here. Let's give the listeners some context on who is FitLab and how does that look structurally? Who do you serve and what problems do you solve for them?
Yeah, FitLab is uniquely positioned as, a portfolio of brands really looking to meet consumers where they are in their journey and then move them through our properties, meaning we want to meet you if you're interested in attending an event. We have an events-based company called Ragnar. Bring you in, have you be part of a race. It's a running relay event. But from there, where else can FitLab from a portfolio of brands be able to service that consumer? Whether that be with home fitness equipment being Assault, whether that be in-person studios. We're currently building out a boutique studio business pretty rapidly through the United States and internationally soon. As well as apparel, fitness accessories, digital, everything. It's really about taking a consumer where they are, and not just being at what point in their journey are they, but where are they actually trying to achieve their fitness goals at, and then moving them through our ecosystem. So it's a very, very unique business model to be a part of and to obviously drive the marketing for.
That's awesome. So I guess the idea of customer lifetime value or customer value journey is always on your mind. Like how do you
Yes.
understand the nuance of the person and which properties can they extract value from? Maybe some it's all, maybe some it's some. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's very different than when you think about driving lifetime value from expansion of product offerings or expansion of like the race portfolio. It's more of bringing someone in where they are and then thinking about the logical places that where they should go, trying to find the information in the data, whether it's geographically based or other purchase behavior based, and think about where and what offers and what brand should be presented back to that consumer. Because we don't want to, the last thing we want to do as marketers is create a lot of noise, right? And
Yeah.
and put too much in front of the consumer. So trying to identify the logical steps and test into it, and start small, right? I mean, we don't want to I don't want to push too much too quickly. And so always thinking about, the end result of that consumer.
Right. Is this an audience that you have come to understand is open to a nurturing of sorts? They're not you're mentioning they're not an audience that would be forced into things, right?
Yeah, it's really about right now. A lot of it is we're thinking about it as natural and organic. Whether that's we've done some collab stuff inter company, right, where we've taken two brands that would speak really well to each other, but maybe the audiences won't overlap. And how do we expose those two audiences to each other in a very unique way? I mean, you see it in the out in the world all the time now. There's all these brands that are doing collabs and whatnot, and we just have a unique positioning where we can actually collab together.
Yeah.
Even when I first came in, we were collabing electric eyewear for Ragnar, and so it was just a really natural thing. You had runners who were outside, and we happen to have one of the best sunglass companies in the world. So why not leverage those products to service that Ragnar consumer?
Right.
And since then, we've made iterative changes, right? And we've decided, each of it is each iteration. You think about it a little bit more uniquely and differently around the idea of should it really be a Ragnar sunglass, or should it be the official sunglass partner of Ragnar is electric? So just a really, really fascinating problems and kind of puzzle almost to solve.
Yeah. A lot of the language you're using, I resonate with. You're almost describing this game you're playing as like the scientific method. You form a hypothesis, you take
Yes.
small pot shots to
Yes.
gauge for distance, and then you blow it open once there's validation. Is that how you see
Yeah.
things?
Yeah, I that's the way I've always been. I've always been much more formulated and calculated on, what I believe the outcome should be based on a hypothesis, what I'm looking and trying to accomplish. I mean, all the way through, I mean, all business strategy, right? Where are we going for 25? It's like, I always sit down, where are we going 25, 26, 27? What does that look like? What's the product mix? How's the marketing going to support that? So even as simple as a cross pollination of an audience. It's like, do we believe is the ideal outcome, and what is the likelihood of that being able to be accomplished? How are we going to measure it? And then there are certain things that I simply just look at as brand awareness. There are just some items where I don't necessarily look at it and say, hey, I need to be able to know if these things actually resulted in an
Right.
X. I'm more interested in the number of eyeballs that I was able to expose these things to. So it is a balance of both. I would say, just my background being analytical, I've always been much more on what's my hypothesis and what's the result going to be.
I love it. What in your journey, what brought you to the family of FitLab? Was there a triggering event or something that called you?
Yeah, I had been connected with the founders from a prior company that I was a part of. And my background for the last, well, probably 13, 14 years now has been in fitness and wellness. And I
No
took a
shit.
really, yeah, yeah. I mean, I started at bodybuilding.com in 2010, 2011.
Right.
And, from there, it was almost that whole journey was all fitness companies. And whether it was, supplements only or content or digital offerings. And so I took this really small hiatus outside of sports and fitness and nutrition and wellness and tried something else. And I just didn't have the passion as much for it. And when I was thinking about what was next for me, I saw what FitLab was trying to accomplish and what their goals were. And just one conversation leads to another. And you think about the challenge of being able to run marketing for 7, 8, 9 brands at this point, and being able to build an infrastructure from a shared service that can actually support that and be able to support it in a way where it can scale up and down. Meaning, some of our brands are much larger than some of the other brands. So how do we curate a team that can know how to shift their focus to the most important things, but not lose sight of the little things? And I just found that to be a pretty fascinating challenge, something that I had done to a degree in my career, but this was starting it really from the ground up. And that's really what drove me. And then obviously what we're trying to do from just a consumer offering standpoint, and all the things that we're trying to do from, like I said, meeting the consumer where they are, being the best in class at really everything that we can possibly touch was really the determining factors.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned team there, so I'm curious. Um, when we first met, you told me that you're operating and pursuing this vision within the marketing strategy with a quote unquote fascinatingly lean team. So tell me about how you're playing the game in that constraint.
Yeah. So one of the things that I embraced many, many years ago was really true like agile project management.
Mhm.
So I went all in on it, and I'm still all in on it.
Yeah.
And I think adapting a process like that, where we identify the things that need to happen, we put clear processes in place, we put clear stakeholders, and we over communicate. When we talk a lot about why things aren't getting done, or where the bottlenecks are, or improvements in the process. And so by doing so, and by having just a really amazing team, we can stay fascinatingly lean,
Yeah.
and still produce high quality, high volume marketing efforts, while still being nimble and agile when opportunities come arise. I think that's the one thing where I think people will sometimes talk about project management and process, and they'll think of it as this very rigid, like, we can't be innovative, we can't be creative. And you just have to bake that into the process. And that's what we've been trying to do, or I've been trying to do with the team, is you can't ignore opportunities. We can't
Right.
ignore when something shows up and we have a really cool thing that we can do with this thing. And okay, how do we do this thing while not forgetting about doing all of these other things? And sometimes it's a matter of we just need to deprioritize something for a little while, and then we can bring that back up when it's the right moment in time. And
Right.
the other thing I will say is it's when you're building something like this, you have to trust the team.
Yeah.
You really have to, I can't be in every meeting. I can't have every fact, every detail. And, I really have to let that team operate and function as real stakeholders within the organization so that they feel that accountability and also that opportunity, right, to be able to make that decision and ultimately, live with the results of that decision.
Mm.
So those are kind of the ways that I balanced it.
You talk about that trust in the team. Is that is that a challenge for you? Is that a hard thing for you to do?
Not with the right people, no. I think, one of the things I always talk about when I hire new candidates is really just true open door policy. Truly, if you need something, if you're hitting hurdles, if you're running into issues, my door and my phone is always available. Obviously, working remote, it's more my phone is always
Yeah.
available. But um, and having that really strong relationship and conversation about like I do trust you, I do want you to be the lead, I believe you have the skills, and really just being a bit of a motivator as well. That makes it easy for me.
Um,
That makes it where I can take, and it comes from the top down. I mean, I think, my co-founders, another reason why I came to FitLab was, I knew they were going to trust me. I knew they brought me in because they wanted me to be the one to drive it, and they wanted me to take accountability, and they can work and focus on the things that are important to them within the business. And I think having that autonomy myself, being able to leverage that with the team, that's what makes it, I think, really easy for me to give up that trust factor.
yeah. What a wonderful environment that kind of you're a part of, but also have a hand in
Hmm.
curating and creating. And you're right. You can stop a person, but you can't stop a team, especially a team of people that are in their zone of genius and they're
Yeah,
empowered to fuck things up.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. And I mean, the other unique challenge that was set in front of me was a lot of the brands had their own marketing team. So when acquisitions happened or things were built, there was in this inherent, like, this is my brand and I work for this brand. And when you start to bring all these people in and you're like, well, you no longer work just on this brand, you're actually part of this brand and this brand. And, you're sending email for this and that. And it just takes time, and it takes, uh, again, it takes the right people, right? Like I identified pretty early who I thought were the people who could do that and who could adapt and who could say, I'm no longer just this. This is my new role within this broader FitLab organization. And I'm gonna embrace it. And that was probably the biggest challenge, was just getting people who inherently wanted to work on the thing that they were hired first to do, and now having them realize that there are other things that actually take precedent over that, even though that's
right,
what you were originally brought in for. So
right,
that's
right.
been that was probably the hardest challenge of starting to really unwind all these teams and bring them in. And it's still a work in progress. I mean, it still happens every so often where there'll be a campaign that they ran last year that'll be super exciting for one business unit, and you'll be like, well, we have to bring that down this year. It's not going to have the same impact.
Right.
Like, to you, it had massive impact, but when you look at broader FitLab, it doesn't have the same impact that something over here may have.
Right, right. So with this lean team, you talk about adopting and embracing agile methodology. Why, for those listening, why does the waterfall approach to project management not work with a lean team?
I wouldn't say that I wouldn't necessarily say that it doesn't. I would just say that what I've been successful with in my career has been agile, and it's just been something that I've adopted everywhere. And when I took a big step back before coming into this organization and the role, I thought about how could this actually be done with the skill sets that I have and the knowledge that I have. And
Mm,
I've never worked at a traditional agency where that's the closest thing you could really look at is like really FitLab has an internal marketing agency,
right.
and that's really how we operate.
Got it.
And so I can't say that other processes won't work, but I can say based on my experience and knowledge, I knew that agile and a process similar to agile would work.
Got it. Got it. What would as it relates to challenges, two things. Like what is the number one sort of macro challenge that you and your team are faced with within the industry you play in, the function that you're leading? And then on the flip side of that, what is the top thing that you and your team would all willingly admit is an area that if you could wave a magic wand and improve radically, this would be the area. So one's in your control and one's not in your control as it represents.
Sure. Well, obviously, I think it's difficult to answer when you go across all of the business units, but I think
Okay.
each individual business unit themselves has its own unique things that they're up against. Where Ragnar, as a great example, is it's really difficult to communicate digitally that it's a relay based running event, right? You run paid media, really difficult to have that narrative be something that you can quickly communicate. So for them, it's rebuilding their grassroots program coming out of COVID. Like, how do you get people in the ground at these activations, really explaining what Ragnar is? And I think each of the business units that you would go through, Assault Fitness, heavily rooted in CrossFit, but CrossFit isn't expanding the way it used to be. So how do we get into new markets there? RPM was rooted as it's a performance lifestyle fitness company, but it was rooted in jump rope, right? And it's like, well, how do we create product offerings that can expand upon just that and then leverage marketing to do so? So I think each of the units themselves have things that we're focusing on and trying to grow and trying to manage. I think if I had a magic wand across the portfolio from a marketing lens, I would just say data and analytics. I feel like because because we're lean across the board, including technology, getting real insights in a really timely manner would be something that I think would alleviate a lot of the time and even some of the stress that goes into like the day-to-day activities.
Hmm. How is that? Tell me if you had the abundance of the analytic data you're looking for, what would that change for your
I mean,
team?
I mean, just a really great example for Ragnar. We had our really positive Black Friday, and we don't have a quick way right now to say, well, how many of those teams came from returning captains, new captains, or upgraded captains, right? And because we're in two separate databases because we've migrated platforms, it's like it's those type of activities where as a marketer, we want to know what worked, and we want to know what worked as quickly as humanly possible so we can try to replicate that. And when you have to dig and dig and dig, and it becomes a longer process, I've just found that sometimes you start to lose that momentum, right? It
Right.
becomes something that isn't as your inquisitiveness, I think, starts to decrease because you're like, oh, I have so much work to do to go find out this one data point. And if this
Yeah,
one data point doesn't tell me what I need, then I'm going to feel defeated. And I think that's kind of
that's
across all
interesting.
of, all of the business units. When you think about, one of our businesses, like the sessions is down year over year, and you're like, well, what's the main driver? And you have all of these different elements that go into it. You have paid media strategies and product shortages and all of these different things. And you're like, well, in an ideal world, this should have been a red flag that we saw, months and months and months ago when we should have identified it. And so that's honestly probably the
Hmm.
biggest one is solving the gaps within data, so that marketers can make quicker decisions. We can, we can optimize spend accordingly, or we can pull back spend accordingly. I think each of those areas, or each of those, you know, I would say like secondary or even third level metrics, right? That you don't look at on a regular basis, but when you need to look at them, it just takes so much time to get access to them.
Right. So have you found yourself being in a scenario where, as a leader, you're uh, basically giving the team license and freedom to, in certain case, make assumptions based on
Yes.
because
Yes.
the picture you're painting here is very very clear in that you go down this rabbit trail and the steps you take are going to be based on perfect pieces of data, but when those
Mhm.
perfect pieces aren't there, we still need to move forward, and so that's
So
where
yeah.
assumptions can be made.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a thousand percent accurate. I think there is inherently something that if you're a good marketer, you have a gut and you know which sense you're headed, right? You kind of know the path, but I think we all want validation in some of that. Every so often it's like I need to check my own gut and make sure that I'm thinking about it in the right way, or understanding it accurately. And so yeah, I think without a shadow of a doubt, there are instances where I will just ask my team, like, what do you think we should do? Like,
Right.
you've been on this, you've been working on this brand for how long? You know the audiences, or you believe you know the audiences. Like, what would you do in this scenario?
Yeah.
And what's your confidence level, right? Because there's always that part of marketers where it's like, I'm not sure if this will work, but I'm willing to try and actually have it fail and accept the results. And I think
Yeah.
that's again something that when you don't, and I like, and even still, even with all of the data in the world, there's still going to be times when you're like, I think I want to try this, even
Yeah.
though this is telling me not to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't be blind to just be like sheep
It's
following.
like, well, it's like the data paralysis, right? Like you
Yeah.
just you don't do anything because there's so much at your fingertips and so much that you could look at and can look at that sometimes you just don't end up doing anything. And for FitLab right now, it's kind of answering just some of those questions a little bit quicker that like I said, I think are relatively important things to answer, for the future state. Like, it's not like I don't know this data point today, so I can't do anything for the next 7 days. It's like
Yeah.
I need this data point so when we go to make new creative for January or February, whatever it is, like we have a little bit better of understanding of the who this was resonating with.
Right. Got it. So with your sort of this internal agency sort of makeup you have, how do you approach scenarios where there may be a skill set lacking or missing entirely from the team? Do you support sort of cross-functional up-leveling and build the plane while it's flying? Do you hire a new person? Or do you rely on
Mhm.
some temporary support?
A bit of both. I mean, where FitLab is always building the plane while we're flying it, so
Yeah.
that kind of goes without saying. Um, for the most part, what I've done is I've envisioned what I think a future state should look like within the organization, and I've just put a plan in place to accommodate that. So it's some of it is stopgap. So some of it's, hey, we're going to bring a contractor in for 20 hours a month for the next 3 months, but whenever we get to this day, this point, we're going to add another contractor, and then eventually that's going to be a full-time hire.
Right.
Or it's it's a combination of all of those things. And it's something else. It's like when people, when there is some turnover and people take on new challenges outside of FitLab, it's always a great opportunity to understand what do we actually want to replace that role with.
Right.
That's always a really, I think it's a valuable point in business that sometimes I think it's overshadowed is, this email person left, so we're going to replace them with an email person. It's like,
Right.
well, let's take a big step back and let's ask ourselves, does the company still need another email person? Is this, I do this exercise every 6 months, and I'm always happy to kind of share my insight on it. But
Oh,
I
please.
like to take a big step back and just ask the question, like, am I, even for myself, for my colleagues, and then for my employees, it's like right person, right seat, right person, wrong seat, wrong seat, right person, and really like do that for myself. Like, mostly I started it for myself as I was progressing in my career. I always wanted to make sure I was being satisfied, and not just I was being satisfied, was I also doing the best service to the business that I was at. And I
Right.
actually self-selected out after doing that exercise before I came to FitLab. I identified that I wasn't the role wasn't right for me, and I wasn't right for the role they were actually looking for.
Right.
And so being able to acknowledge that and have a very open conversation with your, for my at the executive level and saying, hey, I don't think I'm right for the company. And I think if I'm going to depart, I would not replace me with another me. Right. And I think being able to do that for my team and understanding that this person's actually really, really talented, but what they were brought in to do, the scope of that has changed drastically.
Yeah.
So now let's start thinking about what we can shift this person into, but let's get their feedback without having them fear the idea that they're going to lose their job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
talking about career progression and what do you see next? And one of the interview questions that I'll ask candidates is, where do you see yourself in 3 years?
Yeah.
And I'm always very honest with candidates. I'm like, if you tell me not at FitLab, that doesn't stop me from hiring you right now,
Totally.
because that's totally a fine answer to say. Just how do you think about your career progression? Because again, going back to the trust in team, like I like to hire people that have a path, right? It may be a little gray, right? But it's like, you bring in someone to run one channel and you ask them what their goal is, like, I want to manage people in 3 years. And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, yeah, you have a direction, right? Or I want to be a director and actually want to manage a P&L, or I want to be responsible for forecast, like whatever this thing is, it's just really nice to be able to have that. And I think, you know, going back to looking at each person and knowing it's the right person in the right seat at the right time, I think is just a really, really simple, but I think really powerful exercise.
Oh man. I love the way you're playing this game because it resonates so much. I've fired myself before for the same reasons. It's an ego thing that you got to go through, but when you can demonstrate, it creates safety,
Mm-hmm.
amongst the group. There's so many things I want to ask you. One of them is typically, when I'm talking to other marketing leaders that are playing with this fascinatingly lean team, retention becomes a big, big problem because not retention, like if you have a good culture and you good leadership, retention shouldn't be as big of a problem. But inevitably, for sometimes good reasons, sometimes not so good reasons, people leave. What's been your process in terms of if somebody leaves, you have a very tight group with some deep tribal knowledge. What's your process for getting a new person up to speed and into the stream of
Yeah.
where we're going?
Yeah. So normally when I go through the hiring process, I'll identify some people inside the organization that should meet with the top 2 to 3 candidates. And most of the time, it's not, I'll even tell them, I'm like, you're not here to interview them based on their skill set. Like I've already done that. I think, you would be talking to them, but talk to them about how they would work with the team. Talk about the environments that they come from. Talk about, their communication style, what it's like what it's been like working remote for them. How do they feel about that? And I found by doing that, the team themselves feel very included, right?
Mhm.
So they already know someone new's coming in, and 2 or 3 people know who this person is, right? And I don't set them up for long, right? It's not like I'm asking for 30-minute meetings three
Yeah.
times. It's more like just a quick 15-minute sync. Who are you? Where do you come from? Yada yada. I feel like that's been really, really helpful. And again, it's going to sound like a pretty lame answer, but I mean, the team just inherently works really well together.
Yeah.
It's like I could sit, I mean, do I build a 30, 60, 90? Sure. Do I have them meet and, do sit down meetings with everyone on the team? Yes. But I don't necessarily think any structure that I've created allows it to be embraced. I think it starts really early, and then it just happens to be a really great team that is like Jared interviewed them. He hired them. Such and such met with them. They must be a good people's. Let's bring them in. Let's get them involved, and it's more of what I have to balance is, and I don't know how other people have spoken about this, but my more recent hires, they've always wanted to do more, and I think it's this remote world where like
Yeah.
I'll sit down for their 30-day or 60-day review, which is very casual, by the way, and they'll be very, I wish I could be doing more. And it's like, that's the constant narrative that I've had. It's like, I don't feel like I've done enough. And, and it is a constant reminder that because we're in this remote world and, FitLab and other businesses, right, we move so quickly that you just don't take enough time to reflect on the things that you've actually accomplished. And so that's been one of the biggest things from a culture and from a retention and just from just an overall like employee excitement, has just been, all right, let's acknowledge the fact that you've been here 30 days and here's the things that you have done. And you've been here 60, 90. And that's been just a very eye-opening experience over the past couple of years.
That's awesome. I love that. Two more things I'm curious about. The first one is like, what would you personally be willing to admit is your Achilles heel as a leader of a function in a team, an area that you secretly or maybe publicly strive to work on and improve in your journey?
Radical candor.
Little Brene Brown, huh?
Yep. Yep. I'm a very passionate and emotional person.
Yeah.
And what I have struggled with throughout my career has been able to harness that into more critical conversations that aren't fueled by emotion. And so that has been something that I've worked on for a while, still continue to work on it, still find myself most of the time just writing it down and being like, hey, we're gonna have to come back to this at a later time. That's honestly probably the hardest thing for me is, I respect and think so highly of the rest of my peers that I would never want to react to something in a way that would ever negatively impact that relationship. And so, but finding a way to balance that as well as like more timely feedback of, hey, we said we were going to do these things. It's been it hasn't had that's the one area where it really is a bit of an Achilles heel. And I would also say, with my management style, I've gotten a lot better at this. I don't think this is as big of an issue as it once was, but because I've embraced this idea of, are you the right person? Historically, before I adopted that, I was a bit more protective of people.
Mm.
But I've matured out of that into this place where I have to do what's right for the business and I have to do what's right for the individual themselves. So that was an Achilles heel. Would I say it creeps up every so often? Probably a little bit, but it's the evolution of being able to think about that differently has been a really positive one for me.
That's great. I mean, even the fact that you're thinking about it and talking about it, you're probably down the road on it being maybe not a strength, but at least not a
No. Well,
Achilles.
but and sometimes what I've found, not sometimes, what I have found personally is I have some other leaders that I can talk to about the right approach to that
Right.
topic.
Right.
And just having and being able to say, this happened, how would you approach it if it was you going to have this conversation? And I think that's really I try to be as self-aware in business as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Like, I know what my strengths are and I know what they're not. And being able to ask for help from your colleagues is something that I've just embraced. Like, they have skills that I simply do not have, so let's leverage them.
Hell yeah. Strength partnership is most problems and objectives can only be solved through strength partnerships, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And so that's awesome. The last one for you is obviously without giving away too many secrets, like what is the organization in your mind really banking on from you and your department going into 2025? Like what has to be true?
Um,
And it might be
I
different
think
per business unit, but
I think across the board for FitLab, 2025 is going to be a year of growth for us. I think if you look at, I came in of April of 2023, and it's taken some time to get the right puzzle pieces in place. It's taken some time to get the right people, right processes. So I think what everyone is looking to the marketing organization for is realistic goal setting and the achievement of those goals. And you know as well as the raising the flag if and when something may not be achieved, and then coming up with alternate solutions to be able to achieve those metrics, right? Because it's one thing to say you're going to do X and you end up missing X, but when you don't figure out a plan to solve that, that's the biggest thing where I think my marketing team is really put under a microscope to be able to try and do. Now, sometimes it's out of marketing's control, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
it's a logistical problem or an inventory, whatever it may be. But with what we can control, it would be setting realistic goals, the goals that we can really hang our hat on that we're going to achieve, and then hitting those goals, right? And I mean, like, it's like I got Rolodex of goals, right? It's like
Yeah.
you can say it's revenue, but it's like, well, CAC can't get too out of control here, and
Yeah. Yeah.
cost per
Right.
lead can't go sideways over here, and it's like you really have to hit your goals within the constraints in which you've built your project and your process and your map for.
Uh, Damn, man. Sometimes I wish I was Joe Rogan and I could have 3 hours because I have like 30 more questions, and I think our audience is benefiting a lot from this. And we might have to do a follow up,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Jared, thanks for giving us a sneak peek into sort of the way you're playing this game. I think it would be pretty fun and rewarding to be a part of your team as an employee. So I think that you've created a pretty cool scenario there. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
All right.